Welcome to Off Leash with Erik Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. We are talking about Israel. There's so much for us to dive into, so much for us to dig into with Erik's expertise. We did a whole nother prior episode on this. We needed another episode. Erik, welcome.
Thanks.
So here's what I want to know. You're commanding the Israeli military. What are your options?
That'll be a cold day.
Understood.
Look, for them to face, there's 2.2 million people in Gaza. It is heavily urbanized. Some farms, but heavy masonry structures with 300 miles of tunnels. When you look back at history of urban combat, it is super advantageous to the defender, and it negates technology because radios don't work as well in the urban canyons that are buildings and
destroyed buildings.
Just for perspective, the Russians lost 1.2 million killed in action fighting in Stalingrad, in one big city on a river in Russia. 1.2 million.
Why? Because
of the grinding casualty counts caused by the advantage to any defender. It was the Nazis were hell-bent for leather that they had to take it, and Stalin was not going to let that happen. And so they just ground away at each other. And so it's so that kind of urban combat is daunting,
landscape.
Even for the IDF. But remember, that's going to be fought with 18, 19, and 20-year-old conscripts, right? I mean, all Israeli kids have to serve in the military. But that experience lies with the 30 and 40-year-olds, but it's extremely hard. And now with Hamas knowing what's coming, because they planned this attack for at least a year and a half, I would not be surprised if there are roadside bombs pre-laid into the concrete, into the very fabric of everything, so that any advancing vehicle or troops will be slaughtered. So it is an extremely dangerous time. The Israelis have to find something to take out those tunnels, because that's where all the ammunition is stored for Hamas, and the tunnels allow them to maneuver, to constantly outflank. So even if the Israelis make an incursion, they can constantly be maneuvered. If we get the map, please. I would say the first thing the Israelis would do is try to split Gaza in two, and at least
north and south.
Put a force across from heading to the northwest to at least split it, so that the enemy can't have free communication across that terrain. And there's a bit more rural area there, so that's at least a place to start. But Gaza City is three-quarters of a million people, and that is exceedingly difficult for them to clean that out. And now you commingle that with hostages, with civilians that aren't leaving, and it's an almost no-win situation for the Israelis to try to take that.
All right, so since October 7th, the Israelis have been bombarding Gaza from the air, correct?
Yes.
Okay. How does that help them when they want to enact a ground incursion?
Well, it hurts them if you rubble buildings,
right?
Because that's the other lesson learned from urban combat, is that rubbled buildings give the defenders even more positions to fight from and more cover.
But the Israelis clearly had no choice. They had
to. Of course, they had to.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
But they had to strike targets, and they're trying to take out Hamas leadership and the Hamas infrastructure.
Right.
I hope they're innovative in what they do to the tunnels. It's going to save them it's going to save them a lot of casualties, and it's going to save a lot of civilian casualties. If they can negate the tunnels, it'll be a slightly fairer fight. Not a perfect one, but it's a slog. And again, in this day and age of digital media, Hamas immediately, you saw it just a few days ago with the explosion that happened at that hospital. Hamas immediately blamed it on an Israeli strike, even though it was a short round, a rocket launched by a Hamas affiliate, a homemade rocket that blew up in a hospital parking lot. And immediately Hamas says, well, there's 500 people killed.
Even though we had it on video.
Even though it was on video, correct.
And it hit the parking lot.
So they're fighting a propaganda war. At the same time, they're fighting an actual physical war. And the Muslim Brotherhood apologists and affiliates like like Qatar and Al Jazeera,
Right.
will be pounding on the Israelis and stirring up the entire Arab street around against them and on American campuses relentlessly.
Okay, so I understand the rubble is a challenge. So the landscape is very, very difficult. It's urban warfare. You've got the tunnel system underneath, but you've amassed literally maybe 300,000 troops surrounding Gaza. So do you move from north to south?
But again, it's not just a matter of Gaza that they have to face, because if they start pushing on Gaza, high likelihood that Hezbollah, there's daily attacks coming from Hezbollah against northern Israel now.
But isn't that going to happen whether they move into Gaza or
Correct,
not?
but you said you mobilize 300,000 troops. That
Right.
doesn't mean you can deploy them all in the south. They have Israel's model is very much a part-time army that can surge to much bigger numbers in case of national crises. This is the single biggest crisis they've had since the founding of Israel. Even in the 73 war, which was very dangerous for them for a few days of fighting, they lost 2,500 people. They've already lost 1,500 people killed in action just from the terrorist attack in Israel. I mean, when you think, again, what Israel did after the 72 slaughter at the Munich Olympics for killing 11 Israelis in Germany, they now have more than 100 times that number killed on Israeli soil by terrorists and a couple hundred more hostages. So it is a nightmare scenario for them, and there's not a great outcome either way.
But they have no choice.
But they have no choice.
Now, what can they do from the Mediterranean to support the operation?
Look, coming over the beach into an urban environment is exceedingly difficult as well, because you're going to come with what you can swim with or on a small boat.
Right.
So I don't think they'll do some raids. They have done some raids. The Shayatet 13, the Flotilla 13, the Israeli Frogman unit has done some successful operations against some Hamas leadership, maybe some hostage rescues, but this is going to be a land fight. It's very interesting to note that the Egyptians are not wanting to take more Palestinians because they don't want to be burdened with more angry people that have some radical tendencies.
No one wants them.
No one
the
wants
Muslim countries don't want them.
Correct.
I mean, what does that say about this conflict? Is it because the Muslim countries that are not our allies, they want to see civilian casualties as a propaganda?
No, I
opportunity?
think they all these other countries actually have some respect for border security and don't want to. They want to know who's coming in their country, and they're not just going to take them because somebody asked them to, or because they walked in.
So tell me about the Israeli military capabilities. So if they move in from north to south, what kind of machinery do they have to try to clear those streets of rubble? What does that look like?
They will have lots of big armored D9 bulldozers, which is basically a big bulldozer with an armored cab, some of which might even be remote operated because of the high risk of driving into a super high risk firing lane where you can be fired at from all sides, from underneath, from roadside bombs, from rooftops, Right. It is an exceedingly short-lived position to be a bulldozer operator in that environment.
But those are the first guys in.
Yes.
By necessity.
By necessity.
Right.
And so again, this is a engineering war because you're going to have so many explosives laid. It's not just a matter of Hamas shooting them with bullets. They're going to blow them up with roadside bombs, with landmines, with EFPs, explosive form penetrators. It's a very nasty mine. Imagine if you take a copper disc about the size of a coffee cup or of a coffee saucer that's made of copper, and you put that on the front of a coffee can filled with explosives. When you initiate that, C4 blows up at about 24 to 25,000 feet per second, and it turns that plate into a copper slug going about 8,000 feet per second, and it goes right through the side of any tank, any Israeli armored vehicle. It's the same real problem the U.S. had that the Iranians were doing to us while the U.S. had forces in Iraq.
So, exit question for this segment is: those are the military options. None of them are really good options. What's the mission? What's the end game? Is it to eliminate Hamas from Gaza? Is it to take out their entire leadership? What is the mission?
I think the Israeli nation has to decide whether it can live with a festering neighbor that wants its extinction, and what pain do they have to do short term to attain that goal.
So it's not merely
or to rescue the rest of the Palestinian people from a terror leadership that they're suffering under right now.
Fair enough, but it's not merely reestablishing deterrence anymore, right? That's not good enough.
I don't think so.
Incredible.
It's going to be a very, very rough next year on planet Earth.
Unbelievable. Okay, more about a possible regional conflict when we come back.
Imagine a technology company built to restore your privacy, not take it away. You and your phone are constantly bombarded with tracking, surveillance, propaganda, and digital attacks. Even big tech companies claiming to protect privacy create their own backdoors. Unplugged restores what's been lost, starting with a messenger, a VPN, a mobile antivirus. The Unplugged app bundle gives you back what's rightfully yours. Unplugged. Restore your privacy.
We're back. Now we need to talk about a possible region-wide conflict that this Israeli war with Hamas may lead to. So, Erik, obviously, Iran is the puppet master behind the scenes. It seems, from a pedestrian standpoint, that this attack from Hamas, especially with the timing with Saudi and Israel,
designed to block any rapprochement between the Saudis and Israel
to peace, right? So the timing is clear. But isn't this designed to draw all of us into a massive regional conflict?
Absolutely. That's what
That's Iran's desire.
It's almost an apocalyptic desire of the mullahs. I remember talking to an Israeli general years ago about Iran getting nuclear weapons and about using them. But then the discussion was, well, if the Israelis use nuclear weapons back on us, it will kill a lot of our people. They said, yes, but we have 80 million people and they only have 6 million, and we'll still be here and they'll be gone.
So they'll sacrifice as many as they need to.
So it's hard to want to negotiate with an apocalyptic enemy.
So let's say all this is obviously defensive measures by Israel. They have to go into Gaza. That will increase the attacks coming from Hezbollah, the way you've described it, right? Take us from there.
And even from Syria, because there's Iranian proxy forces parked up right against the Syrian-Israel border as well.
Okay. And Iran, here's what's unbelievable to me, is that the Biden administration says, well, we don't really have proof that Iran was behind this. It seems a bit absurd, but tell me more.
That means they would have to have been dependent on signals intelligence for that, because the U.S. suffers from the same delusions and assumptions that the IDF did when this attack happened. It used to be, especially when U.S. forces in Iraq, maybe it's still continuing, there was a courier that would go between Baghdad and Tehran carrying a disk that would convey messages, not electronically, back and forth between Maliki, who was the Iranian stooge running Iraq, and the supreme leader back in Tehran. So there's ways for our enemies to get around some of the U.S. signals intelligence.
Okay, so Israel is in the bullseye. They may have a multi-front war that they're facing. It's not Iran would like nothing less than for this to grow and grow and grow.
Yep.
So the U.S. moves assets in the region in response.
Yep.
Why?
So the U.S. has moved at least one carrier battle group to the Eastern Med, although it's keeping it well offshore. Why? Because as the Ukraine war certainly teaches, and hopefully not a war off of Taiwan, anything today that can be located can be targeted, because there is so many precision weapons made of short, medium, or even extremely long range. And so that carrier has to sit well west of Cyprus to stay out of range of some of the larger missiles parked in Lebanon by the Iranians. So The U.S. moves forces there. The Chinese, for the first time in a scenario like this in the Mediterranean, is actually sending a 6-ship flotilla of warships. It just rounded Oman, and it's on its way up the Red Sea to go into the Eastern Med.
What are they signaling with that move?
They're signaling support for Iran. Why? Because China buys almost all of Iran's oil production, and very much their I wouldn't say ally, but friend in cause and friend against the West. It was really interesting. It was surprising and disgusting to see the Chinese not come out and really criticize even Hamas. The Chinese were just calling for a ceasefire. So Israel has provided a lot of technology, agricultural technology to China over the years, and what a sharp reminder for them to pick their friends more carefully.
So, but this sort of an alliance of evil between China and Iran, is this new? Is this recent? Is it largely because China's economy is growing, they need more oil, and they turn to someone like Iran?
It's an anti-West environment. Anything to break up the Pax Americana that's kind of dominated the world for the last few decades.
But when Iran was operating under sanctions 3 years ago, was China buying their oil then?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Under extremely lucrative terms for the Chinese. The Iranians would have to, usually when you buy oil from those countries, you have to pick it up and you have to pay for it as soon as it's loaded. In this case, the Iranians were loading it on Iranian national ships, hauling it all the way to the Chinese ports, and then the Chinese would pay at a steep discount because they were the only buyers because of sanctions. So again, China is their customer, is their financer in this sense, right? Because if Iranian oil is not worth something unless you get someone to pay for it, China is that buyer. So it's
and China propped them up when they were under sanctions.
Very much so.
Right?
Yep. So now
that
you
goes
have
deep.
You have Iran that's really establishing this Shia crescent they've been pushing for. They've really subjugated most of Iraq, with the exception of the very north, where it's kind of a Kurdish regional government, still very much subject to the whims of Iran.
Right.
But Baghdad, controlled by Iran, because of the Syrian civil war, the Iranians got their hooks in there, which has even allowed them to put troops right up against the Israeli border, even firing some rockets and mortar fire into Israel from Syria. So if this thing really kicks off, fortunately, I think the Egyptians will largely stay out of it. They don't have an interest in trying to relitigate and refight past wars. Right. Although they need to be encouraged to stay in place.
Right.
Jordan, same way. Difficult position for the king there. He is a Hashemite, right? And he is, of all the rulers in the entire Middle East, he has the most legitimacy as a king because he actually
his
lineage literally goes all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad.
Okay.
In fact, he has more of a claim to much of Saudi Arabia by that legitimacy than the Saud family does. But Jordan is filled with Palestinians. So the Bedouins are almost a minority in the country of Jordan. And so you have an enormous, angry Palestinian street there, which can be very dangerous to the survivorship of the monarchy there. So which has been a reliable friend to America for decades, and we certainly want to see that continue.
Okay, but he'll be under internal pressure.
Much, considerable.
So,
and believe me, the Iranians will be stirring that street and stirring those problems up as much as possible.
Right from the ground level.
Yes.
So the best thing that the U.S. can do to help Israel stay out of their way, is that correct?
Is to give them some diplomatic cover.
Okay.
And I would, if I were the U.S., I would give a very clear warning to Qatar to mind the propaganda war that they're waging against the West right now through Al Jazeera, which is flat out propaganda. We do have a base there, and we should. The UAE has been much more reasonable. They and Bahrain made peace, made diplomatic relations with Israel, and they're much more reasonable and neutral in this situation.
But within weeks, without any warning whatsoever, this region has now become sort of a tinderbox.
Exploded when Jake Sullivan in mid-September was talking about how quiet the Middle East has been under their leadership.
In decades, for the quietest in
2
decades.
weeks before this.
Right.
Ouch.
Unbelievable. What would it take to draw a major player into this hot conflict? You've got China there, you've got the U.S. there.
Well, the other major player that has to be discussed is Turkey. So remember, the Ottoman Empire extended from Turkey all the way down through all of Syria, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. If you saw Lawrence of Arabia, that was the Brits sending an innovative officer to rally the Saudi tribes to have them defeat the Ottoman forces and push them out, which at the end of World War I, that's what happened. Then you get the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which is where you draw the lines of Syria and Jordan. And but Erdogan, in his reign, has been talking all about reinvigorating the great Ottoman Empire, including running pictures or maps showing parts of Bulgaria, parts of Syria and Iraq as being part of greater Turkey again. Because remember, Turkey views all of that as wrongfully belonging to Turkey.
But so far, Erdogan has acted responsibly related to Israel and the attack?
So far, yes.
So far.
We hope that continues.
Is Russia too busy fighting in Ukraine to take an interest in this conflict?
I'm sure Russia is cheering this all from the sidelines because it serves as a huge distraction away from the financial and military aid that was flowing to Ukraine.
But Israel has got, this is all defensive. They have to clear Hamas out of Gaza one way or another. They're going to be attacked from Hezbollah. This thing has to heat up. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
I'm afraid
and
you're
that
right.
entire time we get closer to a region-wide conflict, right?
Correct. And the fact that the Chinese are sending forces into the Med is not a great sign.
Extraordinary. Exit question on this segment is, how does the U.S. vulnerability on energy play into this? You've got our interest in Venezuela seem to be topsy-turvy.
So because of the clear malfeasance by Iran stimulating all this attack and this chaos, higher likelihood that Iranian oil goes under sanction again. So what does the Biden administration do? They reward socialist gangsters in Caracas, the Maduro regime, releasing all sanctions on hydrocarbons, on gold, and finance, with a promise for them to have an election in 2024. But the woman that actually won the primary to run against Maduro has been officially banned by the Maduro regime from running. Her name is Maria Corina Machado. Fantastic libertarian free market candidate. It'll be interesting to see if that gangster regime actually lets an election go again.
And her life's at risk in the meantime.
Look, when she travels, I mean, she can't go to a restaurant in Venezuela because if she's allowed to eat in that restaurant, the tax authorities come the next day and close the restaurant down. If she stays in a hotel, the tax authorities come the next day and close that hotel down. If she gets on a commercial flight internally, it's banned the next day. It's reminiscent of what you see a certain party doing to a presidential candidate here in the United States, trying to use all the force of law and criminality to keep people from running.
Using the power of the state.
Exactly.
So, but our vulnerability on energy is playing into all of this, all the way into the Middle East conflict.
Right. All because the green agenda here in the United States has barred new federal leases on land for drilling and exploration. It's banned pipelines coming from oil production
Keystone
in Canada.
was shut down on day one.
Yes. It is a war on energy independence, which makes us, as Americans, much more dependent on people we don't want to have to deal with.
And the world dangerous place where it wasn't 3 years ago.
It's a much more dangerous place thanks to the collapse of deterrence and credibility by the United States.
Excellent. When we come back, we got to talk about the reaction of the United States at universities and in the media to the war that was forced upon Israel. Right after this.
Imagine a technology company built to restore your privacy, not take it away. You and your phone are constantly bombarded with tracking, surveillance, propaganda, and digital attacks. Even big tech companies claiming to protect privacy create their own backdoors. Unplugged restores what's been lost, starting with a messenger, a VPN, a mobile antivirus. The Unplugged app bundle gives you back what's rightfully yours. Unplugged, restore your privacy.
Incredibly, this blows my mind. So in the U.S., you got students, you've got Palestinian Hamas sympathizers, has just erupted since October 7th. We got to get into this. It's unbelievable to me. A colleague of mine just asked me, how is it that the American left could possibly be aligned with a terrorist organization that beheaded babies, that paraded old women through the streets, took them hostage, raped them, killed them, shared the video and images all around the world? How in the hell can they justify that?
Yeah, when you think about after 9/11 in America, where were they celebrating it? Gaza City. What we've allowed, it really unmasks the rot that has become of American universities, so-called higher education, and how these organizations have been infiltrated by Muslim Brotherhood money, the kind of money that Qatar has been pumping into these kind of places, the influence it buys, and the Bolshevik Marxist rot that has been pushing on these largely idiot kids.
One of the first things Donald Trump did in office was to shut down the terrorist pipeline by eliminating any immigration from several nations at the time. Do you remember? And he won in the Supreme Court, by the way, ultimately. But the left was outraged over this.
Yeah, they called it a Muslim ban. No, it was not a Muslim ban. It was a ban from certain countries where they actually couldn't do the vetting because the countries were effectively failed states and there was no reliable law enforcement to ask or to do the vetting of who was going to come here.
There's no background,
totally
no paperwork,
appropriate,
nothing.
Totally appropriate, must be redone, and we probably need to look back and think of who's come here and who does not. I mean, do we want a country that's allowing in people that think that what happened in Gaza is a great thing?
But you've got, we're not just talking about, people who've immigrated, Muslims who've immigrated in. We're talking about white college students who are aligning themselves with these terrorists.
Yep.
Is it anti-colonialism? I mean, how do they rationalize this?
It's the same. I mean, look, you had Black Lives Matter received a lot of money from American industry, from Fortune 500 companies.
$90 million.
All the social posturing and feel-goodness combined with these militant, leftist, Marxist terrorist organizations. I think it's too little, too late for some of these big companies to say, all right, who signed these letters praising Hamas? We're not going to give them jobs. Okay, claw back the money, claw back the billions of dollars you've given these universities over the years, tax the endowments of these places, because maybe they wouldn't have all the money to spend on the leftist ridiculousness, because higher education is now becoming an indoctrination factory for that kind of insanity.
Well,
not teaching
right.
people what they actually need to know.
Harvard's a hedge fund. I mean, it's got a $46 billion endowment.
Yep.
So you're right. It's this indoctrination factory. It is political correctness. It's race politics. It's wokeism, just on steroids. But we see students marching in the streets, basically supporting Hamas. It's unbelievable. Attacks on Jews and Israelis in the U.S. How about
they've become the KKK against Jews, an anti-Semitic. Well, KKK was anti-Semitic as well, but it is a modern version of the KKK. Is anyone that's supporting Hamas for the kind of insanity that they're preaching?
Well, and you've got Black Lives Matter. They did this tweet with an image of a paraglider.
Yes, praising the paragliders that were used to insert into kibbutzes. Okay, the paragliders were not used against military targets; they were used against kibbutzes to go in and slaughter people.
So that's how I got past
in their
gate.
homes.
They came in over top.
But remember, look, the left in America has always had a dalliance with hardcore racism. I mean, remember the senator from West Virginia, Robert Byrd, used to be a grand master of the KKK, never denounced Biden called him a great colleague. So they can't get away with this. They can't be allowed to get away with this. Are you a friend of actual diversity in America, of merit-based diversity in the American way, or
Diversity of thought?
or are you a fan of totalitarian terrorist Bolshevism that will destroy America? Which one is it going to be? It's a pretty easy choice.
Well, and then, within days of visiting Israel, Joe Biden delivers $100 million in humanitarian aid to Palestine. I mean, hell, Egypt would barely even let it in. They let some trucks in to deliver this so-called humanitarian aid.
If you want to deliver humanitarian aid, just say fine. There's $1 million per hostage. Of course, since he also established a precedent of paying $1.2 billion per American hostage held in Iran, I guess their math doesn't work. But yeah, it's weakness compounded on top of weakness on top of stupidity. People say, is it really a conspiracy? Are they trying to destroy the country? I keep thinking it's not a conspiracy. It's just that misguided. But I'm starting to wonder.
But it's a means to an end. You destroy the country to gain power. Ultimately, it's all about power.
Yes.
Right? They want to control and have
that's
power.
why they leave the borders open, because you're importing more and more people that come from societies that don't have a habit of liberty. What we have in America is an unusual country where we used to be focused on self-reliance, where you could be what you want to be as long as you worked hard, and you weren't depending on or asking the state for permission to get ahead. The people that are flowing into America now come from societies where they're used to the government having a heavy boot on their neck or a heavy control over their lives, and they're used to that kind of and expecting that kind of government support, and they make, I guess, great Democrats.
And the diversity movement has led to opposition to assimilation for many of these communities.
Yes, America works when it's a melting pot, not a patchwork quilt. And we have a very, very rough patchwork quilt now.
All right, so let's wrap on the border, okay? And I hate to ask you this, but we now see literally millions have been let in, right? They are,
I think 30 million are foreign born.
30 million. They spread across the landscape of the United States of America. Here's what I hate to ask you. But the odds of a terrorist attacks or a series of attacks within the U.S. in the election year of 2024, which in and of itself is going to be massive chaos, have grown dramatically, correct?
Sure. What you're seeing with the organized militant protests by these Hamas supporters, with discipline, with drone overhead for marshaling, with vehicles blocking certain access points for police, et cetera, you're seeing militant-like organizations done at these protest levels. You also saw a lot of those things with Black Lives Matter protests. So these are not spontaneous outpourings of emotion by people. These are militant stormtrooper tactics executed by trained, hardened leftist stormtroopers in the United States. So the chances of them rolling that out, just like they did in the BLM riots in the summer of 2020, is 100%.
And even though...
I encourage, if you're a mayor, if you're a chief of police, if you're a county sheriff, prepare and say, we're not going to let that shit happen this time. And prepare to prevent and to thwart and to defend our society from militant crazies.
Well, from your mouth to their ears, but it's going to fall on deaf ears in many, many cities.
Sure.
Where they have defunded the police.
If you're
refused to prosecute violent crime.
If you're in a big left-wing run city, be afraid. But not all cities are. I mean, look, I think the other great hard lesson of COVID is that local governance matters. And so your county commissioners, your mayors, that local government, you still have local law enforcement. You can do a lot to organize, and don't depend on the federal government to save you.
Well, prepare.
Because just like in Israel, the federal government did not save them.
Did not save them.
Local organized communities, organized through their local jurisdictions.
That's extraordinary advice, is prepare. Because it sounds ghoulish, but I have to tell you, there will be blood in the streets in the United States of America, and the left will blame it on the MAGA extreme Republicans.
Correct. And I'm not saying go form private militias. No. But there are ways to organize under local law enforcement, under local authorities, so that they have the additional constabulary to prevent the kind of militant tactics that we're going to see again. 100%.
Well, and to be able to disperse crowds, right, and defensive measures when crowds form, especially when they have radical intent.
And to get
That's
after,
all you're saying.
And to get after and interdict the leadership.
Incredible. Look, unfortunately, we are in this more dangerous world. God knows what we're going to be facing in 2024. But our collapse of the border and now our dependence on foreign oil and the conflict in the Middle East, it just spells more trouble.
Buckle up.
Buckle up. Absolutely. Look, this has been an amazing deep dive into Israel. More to come on the next episodes. We're really glad you're here on Off Leash with Erik Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. We'll catch you next time.